Mark, first of all, good morning. And before we start the podcast, I want to tell you are one of the most requested guests on this podcast. and I think we are talking for last 1 month or so. And I'm so glad that finally we are able to do this. This means a lot to me and my audience. So thanks for being here. Welcome to the Design Podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. It's great to be able to talk to like-minded people, and yeah, I'm sort of a little bit surprised that it's been so requested, but flattered. That's nice. So
I remember during the launches, you were there during Interceptor and things like that. So, there's a good visibility for designers from Royal Enfield. And I think because
yeah,
of that, most of at least my audience, they know about you, Siva, and people from Royal Enfield. So
understood.
that's why you've been requested multiple times. And before we jump into questions related to Xenophya and Royal Enfield, and because this is a fanboy moment for me, and I'm going to be asking so many questions to you. But before we jump into all that, I'm just curious. Like, when was that moment when you fell in love with motorcycles and you decided that motorcycle designing is something which you want to pursue for the entire life?
I can't really answer that question because it's always been there. So um,
Really?
I grew up around motorcycles. I grew up. My dad rode bikes, so one of my earliest memories is waiting for my dad to come home from work. He
Wow.
used to commute up into London on a motorcycle, and I would wait at the top of our road. We lived on a little hill into a little cul-de-sac, and I would wait on the top of the hill, and I would jump on the back of the bike. And one of my earliest memories is burning my leg on his exhaust pipe and sitting there with a pack of peas on the side of my leg
Wow.
on the burn. And that love, so he. I can trace that back to my grandfather. My grandfather was a dispatch rider with the Royal Signals. So he
Okay.
served in World War Two. Went all the way through Northern Africa and then up through Italy, and rode bikes for the army. Rode speedway with the army as well.
Oh, wow.
And when he left the army, he came out. He was a mechanic, so he learnt his trade as a mechanic in the army, and then became a mechanic. Um, and yeah, I grew up around bikes. We used to go to Brands Hatch quite regularly. I used to live quite close to Brands Hatch. Um, and my mum painted and draws. She still paints and draws. She runs a little art class in her local village, and so for me, it was I could draw as a kid. It was something that I was good at, was drawing, and not much else. I was never academically brilliant, but I could draw, and so it was. It almost felt like it was just a natural thing when people said to me, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" Even when I was the age my boys are now, I would answer, "I want to draw. I want to draw a motorbike. That's what I want to do when I grow up." And I think for a long while, I used to think I'd do kind of like fan art, like when you get like a sort of a pencil drawing of somebody's head and then the bike next to them, that sort of thing. I used to think maybe I'd do that sort of thing. I didn't realize there was a profession of motorcycle design, but from when I was really little, yeah, I always wanted to draw motorcycles. And to be honest with you, design is the secondary part of it for me. So I always
Okay.
say if I'd been faster, I might have been a motorcycle racer. But I'm not very fast. If I'd been, more mathematical, I might have been a motorcycle engineer. Uh, if all else had failed, I almost certainly would have been a motorcycle salesman. But whatever else had happened, motorcycle would have been in that job title somewhere.
Oh,
And it
wow.
just so happens that for me, those two things have come together in sort of perfect unison, and I'm just exceedingly fortunate that I've ended up as a motorcycle designer, and that's been my career. And also fortunate, I think, in the way that as a motorcycle designer, you fit within the best bit of design for me as well. In that um, I think in four wheel studios you get far less autonomy. You get far less involvement in the whole vehicle concept. They're just so much
Hmm.
bigger. They're so much more complicated. They're so much more difficult to design that you have a much greater division of labour. Whereas within product design, typical everyday product design, a product designer has far more involvement in the product itself. They may have
Hmm.
one or two engineers working with them, but fundamentally they are in control of the design of the item, the object. A motorcycle design for
Right.
me sits beautifully between the two, where one designer can have, maybe a designer, maybe a clay modeler, maybe the designer does the clay modeling, but fundamentally it's one or two designers have overall creative vision for the entire vehicle. And it's we don't have that division of labour so much, so it is much more hands-on. It's much more connected, and I love where that sits between the two. I think motorcycle design is just so happens, as I say, I'm in motorcycle design because of my passion for motorcycles, but it just also happens, and I think it's, for me personally, it's that right balance of sort of the level of involvement you get within the whole project. I think is really nice on a motorbike.
Wow. And we keep on saying that design is a marriage between art and engineering. And I think it was very convenient for you that your father was a mechanic and that your mother was.
Well, so my
They
dad wasn't
are
actually my dad wasn't a mechanic. My dad had
okay.
a motorcycle had a motorcycle accident. He has a very mild form of cerebral palsy when he was born, and
Okay.
when he was in his teens, he had a motorcycle accident, which meant that his use of his right hand isn't particularly dexterous. I mean, it's never really hampered him in life, but so I think he started training as a mechanic when he was a teenager, but
Okay.
actually he went into the post office. So
Oh,
he rode a BSA Bantam, delivering
wow.
telegrams. So when they first had telegrams, he would ride around London. Basically, he would do a lap of London delivering telegrams. And I think he
Wow.
did that for like a year or two. I don't know how long, but it was a year or two. Um, and then they wanted to promote him to be a fully blown postman. And he was like, I don't want to be a postman. I want to ride motorcycles. And so they said, no, you need to graduate to a postman. So he then went and got a job in the civil service. And but he and my granddad both rode bikes all the time. So he had, I mean, I've got photos of him on Greaves's and then on Velocet. So I think he had a 350 Viper, and my grandfather had a 500 Venom, which I've still got.
Wow.
I've still got his, so I've got that's in my garage. I've still got granddad's 500 Velocet Venom. So yeah, so Dad wasn't a mechanic, and I'm not particularly mechanically minded. So I'll do basic maintenance on my bike. Well, no, I don't actually. I'm terrible for not looking after motorcycles. I love motorcycles, but I'm notorious for using them almost as a commodity. I buy them cheap and run them into the ground, and I don't look after them at all. I love them very much, but I don't care for them very often. And I'm yeah, as I say, basic maintenance, things like changing brake pads, pulling apart brake calipers, changing sprockets and chains, and you know, uh, wheel bearings, swing arm bearings, all that sort of stuff I can do. But when it comes in to start tearing down engines and things, I'm not particularly good at that side of stuff. So yeah, it's I'm definitely on that art to engineering scale. I definitely started at the art end and then have learned more and more and more about the engineering end of it. And I'm definitely not an engineer. I mean, I that's almost one of my catchphrases on a daily basis is I'm not an engineer, but could we?
Awesome. So, just curious, what kind of motorcycles do you own right now?
So right now I've got four. Well, I've got five bikes in the garage today. So I
Wow.
own so I've got my grandfather's 1958 Velocet Venom Clubman, which is a 500cc, not dissimilar to a Bullet, similar era. Um,
Right.
so and that's been passed down. My dad had that, and now I've got that. I've got a 92 Honda NSR 250 MC21
Oh,
SP, which is a
interesting.
two-stroke 250, so 60 brake horse, 135 kilos, proper
Okay.
race replica. They were only 1,500 built, and this is in Rothman's colours, so it was the SP in Rothman's colours.
Wow.
Um, it's it's in a bit of a sorry state at the moment. I blew it up at a track day. Oh, probably 15, maybe even 20 years ago now. Christ, yeah, probably even 20 years ago now. Blimey. And time moves, doesn't it? Um, and I rebuilt it, and a friend of mine helped me put the engine back together again, and we rebuilt it, and it was running. And then it wasn't revving cleanly, and so I tried to clean the carbs, and I rounded off there's like a little plug that covered one of the jets, and I rounded that off, and I like, all right, I'll get that part ordered, because it was a Japanese import. They weren't available in the UK, so I had to get parts ordered from Japan.
Wow.
So I was like, I'll get that part ordered. And this was when we were Xenophya, and at the time business wasn't going great, and the credit crunch had hit, and I put the bike. This is when I blew it up. I put the bike aside, and then I've never got around to rebuilding it. So it's sat in the garage, kind of in bits at the moment, and at some point I'll get around to it. But now I just don't have the time. We're so busy with work, I just never get the time to get around to it. And it's a shame, because it is a awesome motorcycle, and they've gone up massively in value. So I bought it when I was a student still, and I only paid, I think it's £1,500 for it, and they've gone up tenfold now. So, so I've also got and not really mine, but I'm sort of looking after it long term. But there was a guy called Paul Ventura who worked for me when we first started at Royal Enfield. Paul was an American, came from Ducati, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, and he was tragically killed on his RC8, just going home from work one day, and so I've got.
So sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was awful. One of the worst things that's ever happened, I think. And I've got his R1, his track bike that I'm sort of caretaking, and then I've got my Honda Firestorm, which I bought when I joined Royal Enfield, and again I paid virtually no money for it, and I used it as a daily commuter. So probably the least practical daily commuter in the world ever. But and then that sort of that got set aside, not set aside, but I some point during COVID, I borrowed a bike from work, and then another, and the Firestorm just sat there, and it's now slowly rusting into the ground outside the tech centre. So it needs some love. I get a lot of grief for, and I love that bike. It's an amazing bike. But then I also get to ride lots of bikes from work, obviously. So there's a GT that I ride a lot, and sort of running joke that it's my bike, but it's not my bike. It belongs to Royal Enfield.
The Continental GT, first generation or the latest one?
Yeah. The 650, which I love. That's still certainly one of my favourite bikes we've done in the last 5 years. I'm definitely a road rider. I'm not particularly good off road. I'm not bad now. I'm getting better, but I'm certainly not good at all. But on road, I'm okay. I've done a few track days, and I'm okay on road. And the GT just suits my riding style 100%. I love the GT. I think it's and that one that I sort of have acquired is that's in Ventura blue as well. So that's the colour. We named that colour after Paul. After Paul passed away, we called that blue Ventura blue in his honour.
Nice.
So that's kind of. But I get to ride almost every day. So right now, I think I've got a kind of model I've got today. I've got a 650 from another competitor sat in the garage that I brought home over the weekend. I'm riding around, and I get to because we buy almost, whether it's. I think people assume that we'll only benchmark bikes that are direct competitors, but you can learn. If you're working on a product, and there's a product in another category that, say, has fantastic seat comfort, why wouldn't you learn from that? Even if that product is, double the capacity and double the price, there may be something about the ergonomic positioning of that bike that can still transfer over. So we buy lots of competitor bikes, almost everything that comes out, and we ride those and use those, and I think it's really important that all of my team use those bikes like a customer would on a daily basis. I don't know about yourself, but for me, it takes, it can take, a few hours before, and when I say a few, I mean like 10 or 20 hours before I feel like I'm comfortable to push a bike really hard. And not only that, but just I'm used to it. You jump from one bike to another, and one bike's got great brake modulation, and it feels like you get lots of feed, and then you jump on another, and the brakes feel really wooden, and you think they haven't got any power, but then you find that you get used to them, and actually they've got plenty of power. You just need to use that lever a bit more, and I find some people can jump on a bike and within 10 minutes they can assess it and they can give you some feedback. I find I need to ride it a little bit longer before I'm comfortable. And also, there's all the things like long range comfort. You got to do a trip on a bike. You got to ride a bike. You got to do 300 kilometers before you know whether it's going to be comfortable or not over a distance. You've got to ride home in the wet and the cold after a bad day at work. With other things on your mind. You're late to pick the kids up, and that's when you find that you pick up different things about bikes that you don't get when you test it, in a track environment or in a kind of a constructed environment to test it, if you see what I mean. So I think it's really important to use bikes every day and ride bikes every day. And I also just think, again, I don't know that I've got any natural talent, but by riding every day, I just think you get better at it, and I've ridden, I try and ride every day. I've ridden since I was 16. And so one of the good things about motorcycles, I think, is you do get better with age. It's not, unless you're at the very top level, you do learn more as you get older. You learn more about riding bikes. So, as I say, I'm still not particularly good, but
No, that's true. Actually, many of my audience, sometimes most of them are aspiring design students, and they sometimes ask me that how to get started with motorcycle designing or something like that. I think what you said, I think that could be the first step, that start riding the motorcycles. That will teach you so many things. Like recently, I attended Royal Enfield flat tracker, that slide event,
fantastic.
slide school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, I used to think that I know riding motorcycle, but over there on that track, flat track, I
So
was
I've
struggling like anything.
I've not done that yet, and I'm planning on doing it this year. And I think for me that'd be really good because as I say, I've grown up as a road rider, so I ride quite hard on the front brake and I trail brake quite a lot, and so I rely heavily on front end confidence. And
Right.
obviously, with that, you haven't got any front brake. You have to rely on backing it in. So I think it'll help me. I think that'll teach me a lot. I mean, interestingly, actually, when I was a kid, so growing up, we weren't particularly wealthy, and we couldn't afford for me to have a toy bike like my boys do now. Um, and so growing up, drawing motorcycles was my way of kind of being involved, if you like, or ownership of bikes. Was that I couldn't afford to have my own, so I would draw the bikes I wanted. I would draw, and then that kind of evolved into drawing bikes that didn't exist. So I'd be like,
Wow.
it'd be nice if that. So even as even as I say, my son's age now, sort of 10, I would sit and I've got when I was a kid, my math books were just full of pictures of bikes and not a lot of maths. Because it just wasn't a
Wow, that's an emotional kind of a memory, I would say, because you know, like from your childhood only, you had that passion to, and you were connected to motorcycles in some way or other. And what you said is quite interesting, that you could not own them, but at least you could sketch them. So that was your
yeah,
way of owning them. That was
yeah, exactly.
interesting. Wow. So during these things, you also mentioned Xenophia. So
Hmm.
let's go there. Like, I
Yeah,
think during your college time only, I think you started Xenophia. So what was
yeah,
your
pretty
thought
much.
process
So,
like? Like, what, rather than going for a job or something, uh, why did you decide
kind
to
of,
start your own thing?
yeah, that's almost it. So we so I always wanted to own my own design business. I don't know why, but even before I started university, that was something that I had in mind. Um, and it was part of the reason I ended up at Northumbria rather than Coventry. I
Okay.
applied for the Coventry course the year after I finished my A levels. So you do your A levels in the UK. Um,
Mhm.
I think at 17 or 18, you finish your A levels and then you go on to further education. And I applied to go to Coventry University design course. And I remember I turned up at the interview, um, and it was hugely popular. And it was a room full of people. Must have been 40 applicants, and they said, "Right, put your portfolio down, go away for an hour, come back, and we'll." And so we came back, and they called out a list of names, and they said, "Right, these people go into this room, the rest of you stay here." So some people left, and then they gave us out some sheets and basically said, "Right, unfortunately, you've not been successful in your application. Um, and we've written some stuff on a sheet. And as I say, I'd grown up dreaming of doing this, and I had this piece of paper that said no, and I was like, and I grabbed the guy and said, "This can't be a no. I need to do this. What do I need to do?" I said, "There's no information here. And so he spent 10 minutes, and he actually went through the portfolio with me. And I basically I think I'd got bad advice from my school teacher, my college teachers at the time, who were art teachers, and so they'd kind of told me to do image, non-figurative images or impressionist images of speed, and all of which was great. But what the university wanted to see was somebody that was passionate about design, somebody that actually created designs. And I said to him, "I've got loads of those drawings. I didn't bring with me because I didn't think they were relevant." I always remember there was almost a sense of when you said to somebody, "I want to design motorcycles. I want to draw motorcycles for a living." People always sort of dismissed it almost as being a bit of a childish. It's not a very. I mean, it is childish. Let's be honest, it is, but and that's great. But so, yeah, he said, you'll have to come back. He said, but it's okay. Go away and do an art foundation. So I went and did a year's art foundation. And then when I reapplied, I applied to Coventry again, but I also applied to Northumbria up in Newcastle. And the course leader at the time, a guy called John Sweeney, who has been a real influence on me. John said, "We'll get you a live project and you can do a project with Ducati." He said, "I know the guys at Ducati, will get you a live project with Ducati. And you can make a thing." And I remember thinking, that's great. I could actually get into start something with this. And so I went to Northumbria, and I met a chap called Ian Wride. So Ian is from Leeds. We met on the second day and immediately hit it off. Ian and I are like chalk and cheese. So where I'm quite extrovert and mouthy, and Ian is the absolute opposite. Ian will sit very quietly, won't say anything. He's exceedingly witty and very switched on, and I've made a bit of a career out of just repeating Ian's jokes and comments, but he didn't say them loud enough, so I just repeat them and then take the credit for it. But Ian. So Ian and I, we were on the same course together. It's all quite ancestral. So in our shared house, his now wife Amy was in that house, and so they met through me. And so we sort of we moved. So there was 5 of us moved into a shared house in the second year of uni, and I had a little tiny box room, and I didn't have anywhere to put my drawing board because we still use drawing boards and markers and pastels at this point. This is all pre-computers, pretty much. He had a Mac. His parents had bought him a Mac, but we didn't have a computer. But so I said, "Well, can I put my drawing board in your room?" And so we then built a partition wall and built like a little studio in his room. And that, I guess, was kind of the first stage of Xenophya, was kind of sat in there with tunes on, working towards deadlines, midnight or 3 a.m. finishes, trying to get stuff done, or not get to bed finishes. I remember rightly. I mean, I remember in that student house sanding body filler in the living room, and our housemates hating it. But yeah, we talked really early on about starting a business right from that point. And so when we graduated, there was a scheme at the university that was set up predominantly for furniture makers. So it was a designers in residence scheme where people that were making high-end one-off pieces of furniture could stay on at the university and use the workshop, use the woodworking shop, use the machine tools to be able to create one-off pieces of furniture that they could then show and sell. And we said, "Why can't we do that?" And they said, "Well, because you're transportation design students, that what are you going to do?" And we said, "Well, we want to do motorcycle bodywork." And we had this whole idea at the time, was there was this trend for swappable mobile phone covers. And we said, "Well, it's just plastic bodywork. Why can't you just remove the plastic bodywork and put new bodywork on?" And so we got a little bit of a grant from the Prince's Trust. It wasn't a lot, and we started in business. And we were so naive. We were, we didn't really know what we were doing. And they gave us an old metal cupboard. They kind of begrudgingly agreed and gave us an old, literally, it was an old metal store cupboard. And they said, "You can have that as a studio space." And it was, It was tiny, and we'd never really made a clay model before, and we didn't have any kit. So and this is just as this is 2001. So this is just as the internet is becoming. Car design news hadn't been going very long. And so we were sort of hungry to know how stuff worked, and we emailed people, and we found as many books and videos. I mean, I remember there was this series of clay modeling instructional videos that we managed to buy off Chevant in the States, that were horrendously produced. They were obviously all done with an old camera, and you couldn't hear what the guy was saying if you didn't turn the volume up. But the music was so loud on it, if you turn the volume up, your ears were bleeding through the volume. So we made a homemade CMM. So in order to be able to measure datum points on the clay, we didn't have anything for doing that. So we got shelving racking, and then built this gantry type arrangement so that we could make a model. But the whole thing moved all the time. So I think it cost us. We would have been better off just eyeballing the clay rather than trying to measure it, because every time you measured it, the thing was swayed, and then we measured it on the other side, and the point had moved, and it was so we started building these body kits. We managed to get a bike off of Kawasaki. We got a ZX9 of Kawasaki, and we built a clay model on that bike. And the idea was to start making fiberglass bodywork. But when we tried to take our first mold off of it, we realised we didn't really understand about draw and draft angles, and because the thing wouldn't come out the bloody tool. And so we learned pattern making skills, old fashioned pattern making skills. We learned, mold making. We learned, things, as I say, like angler draw. We learned that by doing it, and we learned, as we got better at it, we learned how you could manipulate. So especially with composites, with carbon fiber and GRP, because you get some flex in the part, you can actually pull something out of a tool that does have a return edge on it, as long as there's enough movement in the part. And so we slowly learned those things, and we learned by trial and error. It was very much there was nobody there to show us. It was just a case of, and it wasn't just the design side of it, but we learned all of it. We learned the how to keep books, how to pay taxes, what happens when you don't pay your gas bill for 5 years because the gas company didn't register you, and then what do you do about the bill, and how do you negotiate you pay that? And when we had a postman walk into our door and split his eye open and sue us for accidental damage, and so many of those things, and it was hard. We spent, I'd say, we probably, the first 8 years, we didn't really make any money, and we sort of, wow. So we did. I mean, the girls supported us a lot. So Amy and Jenny have been, massively supporting in all of this journey, and we did, we did all sorts of projects at the beginning. We did lots of. So somebody had seen the ZX9 and they asked to design some aftermarket accessories. So we started designing aftermarket accessories, and then we contacted Glenn Kerr, the famous British designer who I grew up, in. I used to get Motorcycle News, or Dad used to get Motorcycle News every week, and Glenn used to do all of the artist impressions of new bikes that would be, the design renderings and his were all airbrushed. They were all hand done and airbrushed, and they're beautiful. If you've never seen them, go and find Glenn Kerr stuff, because it's. I mean, I remember talking to him later on, and him saying that he used to do it with a magnifying glass, because there wasn't a zoom tool. You literally had a physical magnifying glass that you were airbrushing with. I mean, it's a different era, different time. Glenn and John Keogh and people like that used to publish, and we contacted Glenn, and he had a job in the States, working for a company called Fisher, a guy called Dan Fisher, who had made his millions with photocopier toner, and he had this dream of an American superbike, and so Ian went over. Ian was the better of us at clay modelling, so Ian went over to help with the clay modelling. So Glenn was the designer on it, but Ian went over and helped with the clay modelling, and so that was our first kind of full scale bike that we got involved with. And then not long after that, we approached a company called VPro, and VPro were a bunch of ex-Triumph engineers that had left and set up their own business, and they were working with Royal Enfield at the time, and they asked us to do. They initially said, "We've got this project. We'd like you to just do a bit of a response to the current bike, like a design critique of their current product. And they asked a couple of design studios to do it, and we just thought this is the opportunity, so we took it with both hands, and we spent a lot of time actually writing not just about the product, but about the potential consumer, and really getting into the product strategy of the product effectively. And that then led to a project with Royal Enfield. So this was 2005, and Krishnan, who was the head of product development at the time, he came over to the UK, and we met him, and knew nothing about the Indian market at that point at all, really. But they'd been working on a bike, and there needed to be some changes to it from engineering reasons, and they said, could we make sure the industrial design was good? And so we got, I think they gave us like 3 weeks to make a clay model, which was ridiculous. And I mean, during this time, my wife Jenny, her grandfather passed away, and there was a really difficult moment. I had to make a decision: do I go to the funeral, or do we get the clay model done? And she said, "No, you need to do this. This is your break. This is your opportunity." And so we worked that week, that 3 weeks that we were doing that clay model. We were doing, 22-hour days, literally 20-hour days. We were getting 4 hours sleep. We would, but we managed it, and it came out looking okay. And we'd talked to Royal Enfield, and even at that point, I think we saw Royal Enfield. We saw the potential in Royal Enfield. We looked at Kiska a lot, and Gerald Kiska, and I'd met Gerald at a design night, and he told this whole story about, because Kiska started with, there was a handful of them when they started working with KTM, and they won a design competition. Right. It was a design competition to do the Super Duke at the time. And prior to that, KTMs were all purple and white and little niche motocross bikes, and that really changed, transformed, and KTM's journey is intrinsically linked with Kiska and with the value of design. And so we saw that as like a pole star, as a guiding direction, if you like. And in Royal Enfield, we saw the potential for a similar sort of relationship, as a retained or tied in design studio. So initially in our head, it would be that kind of relationship, the same that Kiska has with KTM. And I remember we got asked to go over to India to review a bike, to build the model and review the bike. And at the same time, so this must be about 2005. We then got told, we've actually hired a new guy. We've hired this chap that's been at Hero Honda, called Siva Kumar. And I remember at the time thinking, oh shit, that's bad news. That means we're not going to be in. But actually, that was pretty much the best thing that could have happened, because we then built up a relationship with Siva. Siva and I became great friends, and Ian and Siva and I. And that relationship kept us in touch with Royal Enfield for the next 10 years, pretty much, as a consulting company. And so we worked with Royal Enfield quite a lot over that 10 years. We worked on the Classic. We did the initial sketches for the Classic 350. And that was interesting, because that was a project that, so Royal Enfield came to us and said, we want to make a roadster at the time. So I think that the vision was something a bit like the Interceptor ended up being like. But at the time, there wasn't any budget to change the frame. So they were saying, can we do this on what was the UCE? The new UCE engine was brand new at the time, and the old Bullet chassis, and they were saying, could we do it with this? And so so we sketched some sketches that, instead of doing an Interceptor, because we didn't think it suited the frame shape, we said, why don't you do something that's more retro, more original, more originally 1951 G2 Bullet. And we sent off a load of sketches, and we did a load of work on the engine styling and some other bits and bobs. And then it all went quiet. And Royal Enfield have never been a very easy company to work with as a consultant. And it all went very quiet. And then, I don't know how long it was later, but 6 months later, I got an email from Siva saying, will you come to India? I've got something to show you. So I went out to India, and Siva had been working in that period, taking those initial sketches, evolving them, and created the Classic. And we get credit for the Classic, but Siva really should get credit for it, because he did all of the work of turning that initial concept, realizing it, and turning it into a design product. And And I remember the first time I saw that, just thinking, "Wow, that's fantastic!" And the Classic was never designed for India; it was designed as an export model. So the thought process
Oh,
behind it
really?
was, so the
Okay.
Classic was designed as a 500 export model for Europe. The idea was, how can we
Oh,
improve export sales? So it was unveiled at Intermot in 2008 at the German show, and we helped with the stand design there, and we went along. We got with suits on at the time, um, and we went along,
and I think,
and
correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the time when Royal Enfield was going through a very rough patch, right? Like their sales
yeah,
were tanking, right?
yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. At that point, I think it was down to about 18,000, 20,000 units a year, something like that. It was around those sorts of numbers. Um, they'd just started. I think by that point, they'd just started the ascent. They'd just started the climb. It was very at the beginning of
Mhm.
the trough. But I mean, the story goes, and I don't know how true this is, but um, I think in 2001, when the Lal family, when Sid and his father took controlling shares in Royal Enfield, I think the share price was like something like 22 pence a share, 22 rupees a share. And they're now at what? Uh, they're now £350 a share, something like that. And the story, I think the story goes is if you'd bought a bullet at the time, I'm mixing all my currencies here, but if you bought a bullet at the time, I think it was like $600. And if you'd invested that money into Asher shares, you'd now be a millionaire. It just shows how much growth
Wow.
the business
Yeah.
has had in that time period. So yeah, 2008, and the Intimate show, and we did the press call, and there was very little press there because I don't think anybody, A, I don't think anybody was interested in Royal Enfield at the time, and B, I don't think we actually put onto the booth. I think they put the importer's name rather than Royal Enfield, so the invite, nobody even knew what it was, and there was very few people there, and it didn't get a huge amount of coverage. It got a little bit, and it did okay, but it blew up in India. In India, immediately there was this demand for like, why is this product being created for export markets? Why have we not got this in India? And then very quickly afterwards, the 350 model came out. Um, and as I say, a lot of it was serendipity. A lot of it was unplanned. Clearly, the genius, and it wasn't our genius, but clearly the genius of Sid and the people in the company at the time was to see the opportunity, to see the potential, and to see the demand, and then to grow with it, to grow with that demand. And BGR, who is now our CEO, at the time I think he was head of operations, and he and his colleagues managed to squeeze out of Tiruvallur, which is our original factory in the centre of Chennai, managed to squeeze volumes out of that just wouldn't have been imagined when we started the journey. And that pent up demand. I mean, by 2014, 2013, I think we were at about 90 or 100,000 units, something around about that number. And we then opened Aragadam, and Aragadam was the new state of the art factory. So the initial success helped fund enough to better build the new factory, and that was just like popping the cork. It just all the built up demand. I mean, we had 9-month waiting lists at that point, and we were closing order books. We were saying we can't take any orders because you can't ask people to wait longer than 9 months. And when Aragadam was open, which took the production capacity figures up above sort of 500,000, immediately that changed everything, because then obviously all of a sudden we could fulfill that demand and the volumes just went through the roof. And if you look at that sales curve from 2014 to 2018, it's just like a hockey stick. It's unprecedented, the growth of the business. And I think a lot of
Crazy.
that was right place, right time. I think that and very shrewd decisions by Royal Enfield's management at the time. Sid made the right decisions at the right time. So there definitely was um, luck in some of those decisions, but equally the right decisions. So things like to change the gear shift to the more common by that point. So to go from the old British side to go from the more common Japanese side. Things like introducing a starter motor, introducing disc brakes. It just modernised the product enough, gave it enough hygiene level. At the same time, though, I think there was this growing pride in India. There was the whole Made in India campaign. There was this whole kind of feeling that actually, no, we can make great stuff in India. There was a general, which hasn't really gone away yet, but a general nostalgia from bikes of that era that I think helped a lot.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder whether there was whether the whole boom in the internet and in cable TV also impacted it, because there was obviously immediately, there was all of a sudden this exposure to genres from all over the world, and we then worked on the GT535 for Royal Enfield, and we did that project. And I remember we were doing some research for that, so this must have been 2011 or 12, something like that. And I came over to India, and we did a whistle-top tour of the whole country. We did it was like 8 cities in 10 days or something crazy like that. And we were in Delhi, and we were doing a focus group in Delhi. And I remember asking the room, "Can anybody tell me what a cafe racer is? Does anyone know what a cafe racer is?" And I'd asked this in various research groups, and people had always had a vague idea. It's an old race bike, it's a retro race bike. And we were in Delhi, and one guy started saying, "So cafe races originated in Europe and predominantly Britain in the 1950s. Famously around the Hanger Lane Gyratory in North London, the road system in North London. And there was a story about how you would put a coin in the slot of a jukebox and you'd race from here to here." And I thought, how on earth do you know that? And I'm looking at him thinking, wow, that's properly esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
And then I realised he's got his mobile phone up and he's reading the Wikipedia entry.
Oh,
And at first I thought, I was cheating. That was exactly my response. Like, oh. And then I thought, then the penny dropped for me. Hang on a minute, it's not cheating. His frame of reference is no different to mine. I wasn't there. I was, my dad was there. My dad actually was part of that scene, but I wasn't. I was, I wasn't even thought of at that point. And so my knowledge, my experience of that whole scene was exactly the same as his. I read it on the internet. I looked at magazines. I've seen stuff on YouTube.
Right.
It's exactly the same. Read a few books, maybe met a couple of people, but really mostly the same influences. And it was at that point I realised, actually this is a global market now. This is a fully global market, and actually the influences that influence me today are exactly the same influences that's influencing somebody in India and North America, and that's the beauty of a brand like Royal Enfield, is that nostalgic echo that resonates globally. It's authentic, it's real, and so we did the 535 with the Royal Enfield, but at the same time we were still working with other businesses. So we were doing work for we did work for Rieju, little Spanish company that do little 125 and 50cc little sports bikes, and that was a great project working in Barcelona. Again, with all sorts of financial problems and difficulties, and I mean, being in business was never easy. We did a lot of work for Triumph, so we spent a long time trying to get our foot in the door at Triumph, and initially Triumph weren't particularly receptive. But actually, Simon Warburton, who now is again at Royal Enfield, he was, at the time, he was head of product strategy. He was doing my job now at Royal Enfield, and he responded to an email we sent, and I remember the first time we went to Triumph, they wanted to do some colour and graphic stuff on the Rocket 3, I think it was, and it just seemed too easy almost, because all of a sudden we were working with a company, because we'd never really worked with an English company before. And just doing business, putting an invoice in and getting stuff paid and all that sort of stuff was so much easier than it was dealing with companies in Europe or in India. And so we did a lot of work with Triumph. We worked on the Tiger Explorer. We did the 1050 Sport. We did quite a lot of colour and graphic work as well. We did the 675R, and we did a number of projects that never happened. Triumph used to start a lot of projects and not finish them. And we did some projects. There were some projects that John Bloor started that then never finished, that were in the power sport space but not in two wheels. And they were a great company. I've got a lot of, although they're now a rival, I've got a lot of affection for Triumph. They were a good company to work with. We did stuff for Yamaha. We did stuff for Piaggio groups. We did some stuff for Aprilia and Derby. We got quite heavily hit. Sort of about the time of the credit crunch, there was a lot of projects that just got stopped, and overnight a load of projects just evaporated. And that was one of the things I always found of being in a consultancy is it's a bit like a light switch. It's on or off. It's not like a grocery business where you're selling chocolate bars and business drops off, you lose a few chocolate bar sales, but your overall one project is perfect. If you've got a nice chunky project, that's great for business. 2 is lovely. That's really good. You've got a backup project, everything's fine. 3 is getting too tricky because you don't have enough people to run it, and you then start under delivering and you can't manage it properly, and so you can overtrade and you can. So 3 is not great. And of course, if any one of those stop, that's it. All your work's gone. There's no buffer. There's no barrier in between. It's really hard to get little bits of work. It was all, and that was hard. There were times when we had to pay the team with credit cards. There were times when we didn't get paid for months on end, and that was tough. It was really tough. There were times when it was really, really hard. But we had a lot of fun as well. Running your own business is everything. It's you are chief toilet cleaner. You are in charge of putting the bins out, as well as being the managing director and head of finance and head of sales and marketing. I mean, the time I spent selling the business, walking around shows like ITMA, and the soul destroying, treading the boards at ITMA, going and walking up to people and is there anybody from your R&D department here this year? They're out for lunch. Could I maybe come back in an hour and meet them? And you come home, oh yeah, this is great, and maybe we could do something, maybe we won't. And that constant kind of rejection and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing and it was as I say, it was hard at times, but we also had a lot of fun. We did we couldn't afford to employ established designers, so we worked with graduates a lot, and we employed a lot of graduates, and we had people. We did a lot of design placements. We had a lot of people come on placement with us at Xenophya, and I think if anything, actually, that's probably the thing I am most proud of. Rather than anything we designed particularly, was the fact that we definitely helped launch a lot of careers. There was a load of people that we worked with, over our 15 years in business as a company, that have gone on and done great stuff and are working, across the industry now, in both cars and bikes. And a good number of them have stayed with us. A good number of them came across the Royal Enfield. So, in the studio today, I've got Chris Pollard, Greg Seed, Tom Casher, Ian Wride, Steve Everett. We're all working with Xenophya. And then people like Adrian Sellers that we worked with previously. So, we brought a whole bunch of people with us, people that we'd worked with because we knew them and we knew they'd fit, we knew they were good. And that's nice, that feeling of family has sort of traveled with us. And we did, as I say, we did have a lot of fun. We did lots of stupid stuff. We did the Red Bull Red Bull soapbox race in 2013. We won that in 2013. And we probably should have been doing some sort of design projects. In fact, I think we probably dropped the ball on a project we were supposed to be doing for Triumph because we were spending too long making homages to Malcolm Campbell's land speed record car in a Red Bull soapbox race. I think we overdid it, actually. Everybody else turned up with these sort of homemade races, and we turned up with this thing that we'd built that had fully independent suspension and disc brakes and ceramic bearings and did about 50 mile an hour. But yeah, as I say, it was good, and there are definitely bits of those days that I miss. The Royal Enfield is an amazing company to work for, and I think I've got the best job in the world now, and I don't regret at all ever selling the business and moving into the corporate world. The novelty of a paycheck still hasn't worn off. Effectively, whether I do anything good or not, I still get a paycheck in my bank account at the end of the month, and that isn't the case when you're self-employed. When you're self-employed, and the sort of the entrepreneurial skills that you learn when you're self-employed is have stood us in good stead. But there are bits of corporate life that aren't. I don't get to do nearly as much design as I used to. I very rarely actually do any real design work these days, and I miss that a little bit. But Xenophya was massive roller coaster, and obviously such a hugely important part of our lives. And so, yeah, as I say, we were doing stuff for a number of different brands, and business was good. We were doing okay. And then in 2014, 2015, as I say, the sales at Royal Enfield had gone through the roof, and Siddharth had moved to London. And I think he had this ambition, he had this vision that he wanted to grow the range, grow the product lineup. And so he called me up in, I think it was 2014, and said, "Can we meet?" And I remember we met at St Pancras train station. There was a little restaurant underneath the train station, and we had breakfast or brunch. And he said to me, "Look, Mark, I want to know how we can work more closely together." And I mean, Sid is so approachable and such a lovely guy. You would never know, that he was the international businessman that he is, and the hugely successful person that he is. If you just sat down, and he's so humble and approachable, and he just gets it and he loves it. He loves the product. He's fully immersed in it. And he said, "How do we work more closely together? I want to work with you more." So we went away and we put together a business case for, again, this almost like Kiska-like relationship. So we talked about a retainer. We talked about a number of projects. We were, at the time, we were based up in Newcastle upon Tyne in the north of England, because that's where we'd studied. And when we left uni, we moved sort of this transition period from being designers in residence to then getting our own premises. We shared space with a guy called Paul for a long time. Paul Nash, it was called. He was an ex-army guy who had set up a business making asbestos decontamination caravans. And we learned a lot actually about work ethic from him, because he had this army approach where it was like you get in and you get stuff done, and you work. He when he started his business, he spent, I think, 4 weeks designing all the patterns and making all the patterns for these. They were like a caravan with a shower in that you hosed off all the asbestos with. And he literally lived in his factory unit for a month or two until he'd finished making the first unit that he'd sell. And we learned a lot about being in business and about graft from him. He was a grafter, and I think that's a really important quality. Is what, a lot of the time it's not talent, it's about hard work, it's about putting in the effort and putting in the hours, and he definitely taught us that. And so we were up in Newcastle, and Sid had said, "How can we work more closely together?" So we said, "Well, look, how much of the project do you want us to do? Do you want us just to do industrial design? Do you have the engineering resources to support that? If you're going to do more projects, have you got more engineers to work on it?" And he said, "Not really." So we started talking to engineering partners that we've worked with previously, and we started talking about setting up something with another engineering company. And we said, "Well, if we're going to do that, we should probably be somewhere more appropriate." So we looked at a number of different premises locations. We looked at Myra, we looked at Bruntingthorpe, where we are now, and we put together a number of different business cases and scenarios, and went back to Sid with them. And Sid looked at them and assessed them, and he said, "Look," he said, "this is fantastic, this is great, and there's a load of stuff in here that we're going to take forward. But what I really want is you to come and work for the company." And I remember that feeling of, we've spent 15 years bleeding for this, and do we want to let it go? And I think we dragged our feet a lot. And I think Royal Enfield thought we were negotiating. I think they thought we were being a bit hard-nosed with it, and we were negotiating. We weren't. We genuinely didn't know what to do. We must have been about a year. And then there was a project that we were working on with John Bloor that got cancelled. And there were a bunch of engineers that were working on that project. And one of the guys was a guy called James Young, who's now head of engines at Royal Enfield, engine development at Royal Enfield. Okay. And I remember ringing Sid up and saying, "Look, there's this chap that's available. He is super good. He designed the Polaris RZR 1000 engine. I think he did the 675 engine. He's really good. You need him. But I think he's going to go to Polaris if you don't get him." And I think Sid acted really quickly and hired him. And I think he was pretty much number one. And then Ian and I were employee 5 and 6 of the UK subsidiary of Royal Enfield. And we joined in 2015. So in February 2015, 2 days after my birthday. and it's the best thing I've ever done. It was by far and away the right choice. So we did an asset sale to Royal Enfield. We joined the company. They bought out all of our old premises, and we relocated. We moved the family down in the Midlands, and the rest is sort of history from there, really. So that's the story of Xenophya. But it was, obviously a huge part of my life, and a massive, learning. And I mean, I'm now 7-8 years into Royal Enfield. And so it's now getting to the point where, that chapter is a whole new chapter in its own right. And as I say, there's not a day I regret that decision. And I look back and I remember when COVID hit, just thinking how tough that must have been for so many of the small independent studios. And I don't know whether we would have survived that. In all honesty, I don't know whether we would have got through it as a business. And at that point, I was so grateful to be part of a big company that really shielded us from that. I mean, honestly speaking, we shut down production like everybody did for a little while, but development carried on almost. Everybody took their laptops home. We went home. We worked from home. Because we're a satellite anyway, we're constantly, as you and I are talking now, this is how we do business every day. I wake up in the morning and I'm online with India from first thing in the morning until India finishes their day at sort of 3 p.m. in the afternoon for us. And so honestly, it didn't really make a big difference to how we worked. But I'm sure if we'd been a consultancy, that would have been a different story. I joined Royal Enfield in 2015. Initially joined the company to work on the Twins project. So Ian and I came over. We brought a few of the guys with us. And after not very long in the business, Sid said, actually, I've got another role I'd like you to think about, which is head of product strategy. And my initial response was, I know nothing about that, Sid. I'm a designer. That's not my, that's not my background.
Actually, yeah, true. When I looked at your profile, even my curiosity was around this point that how did you move from design to strategy?
So obviously, within design, there's a lot of strategy within design. You can't design something without thinking about what's the purpose of this. Why are you doing it? What's the reasoning behind it? And as Xenophya, we'd already done a lot of design strategy consultants, so we weren't. It wasn't just an industrial design consultancy creating styling shapes. We were already very heavily into the why and the who and the what are the kind of the core, the people, the place, the price, what motivates people, what drives people. And so I guess Sid had seen that, knew that, had already seen the papers we'd written, the recommendations we'd written. And I guess that was the thought process there was, and at the time I thought, perhaps and like everyone, you think, well, I'll if they're really keen and they want me to try, I'll try, and I've not been found out yet, so I seem to be okay, I guess. But it's I think it's one of the biggest differences between being a consultancy and being part of the business is that as a consultancy you get one or two chances to say, I think you're doing the wrong thing. So a client will come to you with a brief and they'll say, we want to do this, and you say, okay, but are you sure that's the right thing for your business? And you get one or two chances of that. If you keep saying it, they ask you not to do it anymore. Come back to you for a third time. They'll find a different consultancy. Whereas when you're in the business, ultimately there are times you have to say, okay, for the business we've got to go in a different direction. But your influence and your ability to have that conversation openly is much better. And that's the thing I really love about Royal Enfield is the ability to really influence the design direction of our product. And that connection between consumers and product is really direct. And I love talking about motorbikes. I love meeting people and talking about bikes. I love the way that you can go anywhere in the world and you can meet somebody and you can talk motorbikes straight away, and you've got a common denominator. And I remember the first or second time in India, back in 2005, when we were doing some research, and I met a bunch of. So we did all the research stuff. We did all the formal. And I'm not a massive fan of formal research. I much prefer the face-to-face, just chatting with someone. we went outside, and I said, "I'll show us your bikes. What did you come on?" And we went down, and they had a bunch of bullets that had all been modified, and there was one guy had the 2-spoke alloys, and I was like, "Wow, I've never seen anything like that before. That can't be safe." And neon lights and all that good stuff, and I just remember at that time thinking, this is just like me and my mates when I was a teenager. There's no difference at all. The fact that I'm in India now, and I grew up in me and my mates with little 125s and 50cc bikes around the chip shop, the fish and chip shop. That's exactly the same as these fellas were around a chai stall. It's the same, meeting your mates, talking about what you've done, where you're going to go, the shared journeys together, the fun of breaking down somewhere, and the stories that go with that, or stories of when your mate crashed into a hedge, and all of those things are kind of universal wherever you go, and continue to be the case wherever I go in the world. I meet people and I talk about bikes, and I love that about my job. It's the best bit of my job. So I was asked to do product strategy, and then about, I don't know, 18 months after that, Sid then said, actually, right now we've got a number of different industrial designers that are doing different industrial design jobs within the business, but there's nobody actually in charge of the function. So would you take that on board as well? And again, I wrote an email saying I don't think I should. I said, isn't there a conflict of interest between design and product strategy? Are those two not? And he said, I think you'll be all right with it. I think it'll work. So again, I said, okay. And again, I thought at the time perhaps that wasn't a conscious decision, but actually, I think Sid knows exactly what he's doing, and I think that was he wants Royal Enfield to be design led. He wants that connection between design and strategy, and I think that was a clear decision. And so today, my role encompasses both. So I'm in charge of industrial design and product strategy, and within those teams, I've got a small concept engineering component, so that when we're coming up with new concepts, new ideas, we've got a small team that create engineering layouts and packages, and kind of allow us to do stuff quickly, and before the whole machine gets involved and the full process takes over, we can do stuff quickly and easily. We've got a CGI team, so we do all of our own in-house CGI, and that started as can we visualize product, but they're so good at it that they've ended up doing a whole bunch of the marketing content that's needed. So a lot of the stuff that you see when we do a press release, a lot of the studio shots are all done in CGI now. We've got obviously a very competent colour trim and graphics team that we've built, and they're very good. And then we've obviously got 2 studios. So we've got 2 studios, one in Chennai and one in the UK. And I can hand on my heart say I think we've got one of the best design teams anywhere in the industry, anywhere in the world. We've got so much depth of talent, people that are hugely experienced. I mean, people like Steve Everett that have been in the industry for years. Steve's been around. He's done it all. He's worked on everything from Carl Fogarty's Patronus race bike all the way through to he did the Suzuki B King, and he's done all sorts of stuff. And he just did the Hunter that we just launched with Steve's project. Adrian Sellers has worked for Kawasaki, Honda, has worked in Yamaha, has worked in North America, in Europe. He did the Super Meteor that's just come out. In our studio in India, we've got guys like Debbie and Kashap who have come from Kawasaki and Honda, and are just really accomplished, great designers. Gogs has came over from secondment from India and is still in the UK. Did the J1D, again, super talented. And then the guys that I mentioned previously that came over from Xenophya and are still with us now. We've got, really good model makers in the team, and model making is a really important part of what we do at Royal Enfield. So, I'm really keen that all the designers can clay model and can work on a clay and can touch a clay. I've never got this whole, you have a separate clay modeler and a designer, and the designer's not allowed to touch the clay nonsense. I don't get that. I think it's really important that you touch and feel a design. A motorcycle is it's a personal product. You hug a motorcycle, you wrap your entire body around a motorcycle. There's not many people that you envelop like you do with a motorcycle, and so you have to make a physical thing of that. You have to see it in physical. You have to touch it and feel it. And so we've got some great modellators, Pete and Gopal, that lead up those two teams, and we've got within the colour trim and graphics team, I've got some really good people there. So Decker, who has been with Royal Enfield for forever, almost as long as Steve, rather than Decker, pretty much from when he graduated and joined Royal Enfield back in 2005. Heads up that side of stuff in India. And then Darlene, who came over from Kiska, she joined us a few years ago from Kiska. And between them, they're doing some great stuff. I genuinely think, again, our colour trim graphic is now some of the best in the industry, and is sort of leading the way in many ways. And so, I feel like we've got just a really great, depth of quality and talent within the team. And that's really nice to be in that situation, and very international as well. So obviously we've got a bunch of Indians, we've got a bunch of Brits, but we've also got Australians, Germans, Italians, French, Americans, Latvians, I think. Is it Latvians? I think so. But people from all over the world in the team as well. And that really, again, that global viewpoint of the world is really important, because we are a global brand. And I think Royal Enfield has this nostalgic echo. We have this heritage that is 100% authentic. We are the oldest motorcycle brand in continuous production. Certainly motorcycle, if not two-wheeler. I think Peugeot might actually beat us in terms of timing for scooters. But certainly proper two-wheel motorcycles, we're a little bit older than Harley, we're a bit older than Triumph. And that is genuinely unbroken line of manufacturing. And the story, there was that 25-year overlap between when India started manufacturing in the 50s and the UK arms stopped in the 70s. So there was a 25-year overlap, a 20-year overlap. And that 120 plus years of heritage is authentic and true. And that resonates around the world. So wherever you go, that nostalgic echo means something. And so what you get is almost this virtuous circle where obviously we get economies of scale. So the scale that you get in India is just so much larger than it is anywhere else. So we'll do, and when we were doing projects for other companies in the past, you'd have conversations about, can we afford to retool that? So we want to change the shape of the fuel tank. Can we afford to retool that? We're going to do 5,000 units, 10,000 units. You've amortize the cost of the tooling over that many units. So if it costs you $300,000 pounds to do a tool up a fuel tank, you have to amortize that cost. You have to spread that cost over the number of units you're going to sell to make to get your return on investment. In India, when we're doing 20,000 units a month of a model, you pay back that tooling almost instantly. So the discussion then changes. You start thinking about part price and what your BOM cost is, and so it changes how you think about the design of the product. But it also means that we then get, because we have those economies of scale, because we can produce in such larger volume, that then helps sweeten the value proposition. So our cost per unit is cheaper, which means we can offer products that are as good as, if not better than, the competition at a lower price point. And that then becomes really, really appealing in global markets. We sell into global markets, and selling and being present in global markets does a couple of things for us. It helps insulate us against fluctuations in the Indian market. So the more global business we can do, the more insulated we are from massive dips or falls in the Indian market. And it allows us to grow our business and our footprint globally. It allows us to improve the perception of the business globally as well. So by selling products in Europe and North America, that helps improve our product in India, and we get this great. So we can do, and we're now at the point where some of the products we're doing, especially in the higher capacities, India today isn't quite a big enough market just alone to justify doing a product. So, or at least that's what we think, and we may be wrong with that. So, for example, with the Super Meteor, when we put the business case together for that was a 50-50 split. We said, well, if we just did it in India, we probably wouldn't get enough volume to justify doing it. If we just did it in Europe and North America, we wouldn't get enough volume to do it. But put those two together, and then we can get it at the right price point, and we can get the value proposition really good. Turns out we were slightly wrong with that because we're doing so well with the Super Meteor in India that the response has been so fantastic that I'm not actually sure we couldn't have just done it in India now. But that duality of the business, and so we've just reached this past year. We just cracked 100,000 units export, which is about 15% of the business now. And the goal is to continue growing, so to continue growing India, but also continue growing export. And I think that the fact that sort of the duality of the brand, the fact we have this brand that has got 120 years, but is also able to produce stuff volume, that gives us such a great competitive advantage that I don't think anybody else has that potential. And there's so many things that we can still do as Royal Enfield. If you think, for me, we've just sort of it's the tip of the iceberg. We've got a load of great products now that reflect our heritage and our background. But there's so much more we can do, and there's so much more we're going to have to do as the industry changes and time goes forward. For me, Royal Enfield, there are three core things a Royal Enfield has to be. So, number one, it's got to be storied. So it's got to have a reason. There's got to be a purpose for it. We should never do a Me Too product. We should never just do something because somebody else is doing it and it's selling. It should always be, and that story can be a heritage story. It could be something like the classic where we say, well, we've taken a product and we've looked at what we did and we've created an authentic representation of that, a modern version, but an authentic and something that has got the love of that story behind it, and that's created it. And so, if you think of, say, the classic or the Pegasus, or where we had really strong stories behind them. Or it may be something about the way people use our bike. So the Himalayan is a great example of that, where people took our bikes up to the Himalayas. They were the way they used them. We saw how they did that, and we created a product that met that demand or that usage pattern. But there was a reason for it. There was a story behind it. Or, when we did the Thunderbird X, it's because we looked at how people were modifying Thunderbirds and how they were customizing Thunderbirds. And we were like, actually, there's another opportunity to do something like this. And that then led into the Meteor 350 and how we did that product. And so there's always a story. There's always a reason behind it. So that's one. It has to have two, it has to have desirability, and it has to have a level of authenticity that is there. So the authenticity partly comes from the storytelling, but also you can walk into a showroom and despite the price positioning, a Royal Enfield is as authentic. It has the same level of wherever you are in the world, the same level of kudos as any of those other old world brands. So you could stick a Royal Enfield next to a Harley or a Triumph or a Ducati, and it's in that same category. It's a desirable and you walk into a showroom and you look at it and just think, I've got to have that. That's beautiful. I love that. I must have that in my life. I need to make something happen. And you can spend 10 years dreaming about owning one of these bikes, and that's how it should be. But they're not, and this is the third thing that is really important, is there's plenty of brands out there today that can do that can create authentic, storied bikes that are beautiful. A Ducati Panigale or a Harley Dynaglide or a BMW GS 1200 all tick those boxes. They're massively desirable. They've got an absolute purpose. They exist for a reason. They've got the story behind them. The difference is the third pillar, which is accessibility. And for Royal Enfield, accessibility is really important. Now, that isn't just about price. Price point is clearly a part of that. And again, that economy of scale allows us to come in at that price point. But actually, more than that, it's about you can do it. You can manage it. You can do this. You can get on that bike and you can ride it. And the Himalayan is a great example of that. There are so many big, intimidating adventure bikes today. And what the Himalayan has done is revolutionized the industry and said, you don't need a massive 150 brake horsepower, 20,000-pound motorcycle that you're terrified of dropping. A little 24 brake horsepower motorcycle will get you around the world, and people like Itchy Boots and have illustrated that. It's that accessibility, that idea that she bought that bike because she thought, I can do that. I can, she was sick of backpacking. She didn't want to carry a backpack around anymore, so she bought a Royal Enfield, and that started her journey. I've always wanted to go racing, and I'm not particularly, and I did a race on a GT 650, and again, it was accessible. It was something where I thought I can do this, and I did it. And that for me is at the core of Royal Enfield, and it's the attitude of the business. You know, it's we're not exclusive. Um, we're not. You know, we're about trying to get everybody. So things like the slide school, that's about getting people involved and doing it. Our approach to motorsport. You know, we don't ever go out to try and. Our goal is not to be let's lob a load of money at this and go and win the MotoGP world title or something. I mean, I love racing. I love watching racing, but that would be totally the wrong thing for a company like Royal Enfield to do. But our approach to motorsport is one of grassroots. It's you build it and you ride it, and you can do it too. So the build, train, race series that we do in the US, where we've got a bunch of girls and women that we give a bike to, they build a bike into a race bike, and then they go and race it against each other. And it's that whole you can be part of this. Again, as I said before, I'm not a great off-road rider, but I a Himalayan has now taken me, and I've seen amazing places in the world because of that bike. And I think I would have been intimidated doing that on another bike. So, we did. I mean, I've ridden up into the Himalayas and I've done trails there that I would never have thought I could manage. We rode
Oh, really? Okay.
we did from Chennai to Goa for Ridermania last year, and we did
Oh,
about
nice.
1,000 miles, and we did all on the back road. So I used this app called Kalimoto, which gives you little windy routes and back roads, and we went up to so we came sort of down through all the wiggly parts past down to Salem. So we came through Yukut and down through past the twisties in that way, and then round the bottom, and then up through Uti, and then up to Chikmagalur, and we went over Kemangundi Tiger Reserve, over through Kemangundi Mountain. And again, had I not been on a Hemi, we probably wouldn't have made the journey because at times we were riding fully off road, and we got to see wild elephants, and we got to see and it's stuff that my off-roading capability isn't good enough that I would have thought, I can manage that. But the bike allowed me to do it, and I've got enough skill now that I can manage it, and that then allows me to get to see something. And that, I think, that's the essence of Royal Enfield. It's that yes, you can do it. So, and our bikes, going back to that global thing as well, our bikes are the same bikes. We don't build different spec bikes for different parts of the world, because actually, I passionately believe that what makes a good bike in one bit of the world makes a good bike in another bit of the world. We do sell to different people. So there is a different demographic for an Interceptor in India than there is in Europe. But the thing that people love about the bike is the same wherever you are. That neutral handling. I mean, I love how on an Interceptor or GT, our chassis development team, our chassis dynamics team, vehicle dynamics team, is headed up by a guy called Paul Young. Paul is a ex-MotoGP Aussie guy, he's little slight fella. He is unbelievably fast. Like, you just can't. It's a different headspace of how quick Paul is. But he and his team, they work together. So him and the vehicle dynamics guys, so the Praggy and Chris and all those guys, they work together to create a neutrality in our handling, which means that you can be mid corner, you can be pushing a bike, you can be going around a hairpin, you can take a fistful of front brake, and the bike doesn't it doesn't stand up, it doesn't change direction. It just, you can tighten the line up, you can push it around the corner, and the bike goes with it. And that, again, that's all about accessibility. It's all about creating a bike that anybody can ride and feel like they're having fun on. And if you're an experienced rider, yeah, you can have fun on it. We get lots of people that ride the bikes that really know what they're doing, that are really, really experienced riders, and they love our bikes. And then people that are coming to it for the first time. And that for me is if you tick all three of those boxes, you've got a Royal Enfield at the end of it. And so that's, in many ways, that's quite a wide remit. That there's lots of things that we could still do that we haven't done today that could fit into that remit. So I kind of think we're just, we're still at the very beginning of this story. There's still so much more we can do. There's so many exciting projects, and there's so much that we are doing. I mean, we've talked about lots about the products that we have in development. And we're not particularly very good at keeping secrets at Royal Enfield. People are constantly getting spy shots. But we've said publicly we've got number of engine platforms that we're developing at the moment, where we've got a whole bunch of new models based on those platforms. We're looking, our EV journey has started. We're experimenting with EV products. We've got stuff that we're working on right now. The biggest change driver for the industry in the next 20 years. I'm not saying anything that isn't already in the public domain. So Sid's already said a few times now that we're working on EV. Where EV is a really interesting challenge. There's some great stuffs about EV bikes. There's some great features about EV bikes, but there's definitely some challenges. I mean, the thing that I think always hits it home for me is when you think of the energy density question. So a litre of fuel, if you think about a litre bottle, is the same energy density. To get the same in battery cells, you need a meter by a meter by a meter box. So a litre of fuel to a meter by a meter cube of batteries is the same conversion. Now, obviously, an electric motor is more efficient at converting that energy than a petrol engine, so it's not quite that. It's certainly going to be an interesting future, and clearly for a brand like Royal Enfield, where the thump, the single cylinder engine, has been such an important part of who we are for so long. It's we've got to think about those things, but in that framework that I just talked about, the sort of the three pillars of storied, authentic, desirable, and accessible. I think there's lots of opportunity there. There's lots of things we can do there. Royal Enfield, throughout its history, has made useful, everyday motorcycles that people can use. That's what EV can offer. There's a lot of opportunity there, and I think where motorcycles have an advantage over cars is cars need to transfer a huge amount of energy. So for a car, if you need very expensive charging systems to be able to quickly transfer lots of energy to a car, or you have to charge it overnight. It has to charge for 15, 20 hours before it's fully charged. Motorcycles are much smaller and lighter, so the amount of energy you're transferring is less. So if you can keep that small, then you can maybe reduce charging times. So I think there's lots of opportunity. There's lots of potential there. Whatever it is, you're still playing with a big puzzle. It's like a big three-dimensional puzzle. Any motorcycle design is about a three-dimensional puzzle, and about taking all the component parts and arranging them in a way that gives you proportion and stance that works. And honestly speaking, that doesn't change whether it's petrol or electric. There's still challenges there. I think visually the biggest challenge is you've obviously got a more monolithic slab in the middle of the motorcycle that you need to deal with. So whereas with
which is completely exposed, basically.
Exactly, with an ICE engine, you've got detail and visual interest in all the separate component parts, and the job of I always say that especially motorcycle design, it's a bunch of ununified parts that you have to try and put together to unify them. So it's a bit like if I gave you 3 chess sets and I mixed them all up together and then said, right, now sort those back into those 3 chess sets. Even though the pawn is a completely different shape to the king and the queen and the rook, and the design language of each of those pieces would allow you to separate out the sets again. And I think that's what you're trying to do when you're designing a motorcycle, is you're trying to make all these separate component parts. In a car, it's a single homogeneous form, or a form that's split into boxes and proportions. And I'm not a car designer, I don't know actually, but but a motorcycle is making all those individual components work together, and that's part of the interest, is that you've got that kind of almost the richness and layers of, as you walk up to a bike, you inspect the details as you get closer and closer. You look at the component parts, and every motorcycle enthusiast, the first thing they do is get down deep and look at the component part. When you take away the engine, which is a visually rich element, and you replace that with this monolithic block of battery cells or battery pouches, that then gives new challenges, because you've then got to think about, okay, how do I integrate that? How do I make that still feel part of it? How do I not make it feel like I've just put a cardboard box with a bunch of stuff around it? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how we and how other companies deal with that.
I think last that 15-20 minutes, I think it was a very nice ride through a memory lane. Then, like you started talking from your Xenophya journey, talking to likes of Glenn Kerr, Gerald Kiska, and people like that. You know, I was trying to recollect what was I doing during that time. For example, when you said in 2008 and all, when you were doing classic, and that time I remember Royal Enfield was going through a very rough patch, and I was doing engineering, so I was listening to some of the interviews and things like that, and how Siddharth Lal, the man behind this company, how he was putting out the strategy and things like that. Then you started talking about your encounter and projects with Royal Enfield, and I clearly understand when you said Royal Enfield stands for those three pillars basically. One is the story, second is the desirability, and third is accessibility. I also own a Royal Enfield Hunter, and I can totally resonate with what you were saying. People don't buy Royal Enfield looking at the spec sheet, so to say. I
Correct.
think
Yeah.
what you said is very relevant. That story, that nostalgia, and that accessibility. For example, when I had gone for this flight school event, so there was one girl rider. She came, and that was like Hunter was just launched basically. And that time she had come with the curiosity to see the bike and everything. She sat on the bike and she said this exact word, like, this looks accessible. This looks very easy to ride. And I think that's what makes Royal Enfield per se. But I think you kind of summarized all my questions actually. Whatever I was supposed to. Like, you covered almost all of them. So I think you made my job little easier. And also, you mentioned people like Siva, Kashyap, and Devi Dutt. I have had chance to personally interact with them. I have in fact worked with Kashyap and Devi Dutt when I was in Honda. So I know
Okay.
these guys. I know, and Siva, I met him in a design college, and he's such a lively person, full of energy, always cracking
He's
jokes.
and he's also
So,
full of. I think Siva's full of wisdom as well. I love
right,
sitting
yeah,
and chatting with Siva, and he's so Siva's family background were temple carvers,
right,
so temple sculptors, and he has this curiosity. I mean, so he's learning about that. He's learning the family as a sort of a in his personal time. He's learning the family background and learning about the sort of all of the what's the word, the fundus that goes into and all the theory and the that goes in
mm,
at creating those temple sculptures, and everything has meaning. I think that's really interesting. I've sat and chat with him about it before, and none of it is done just because it's done. There's always a reason and a meaning behind it, and the shapes and the forms, and Siva always pulls back and looks at that in that sense. And I always find it's very interesting to talk to Siva. There's some fantastic design talent in India. I mean, we've had guys like Gagandeep that came to us for a while.
Jagati, yeah, yeah.
Super
He's with me
talented
in
designer.
Bajaj. Yeah.
Yeah, really
That,
talented designer. I mean, it was our loss when we lost him, unfortunately. But yeah, I think India has such an opportunity because of the size of the market and the number of companies there. I mean, it's interesting. I read there was a book written by a guy called Bert Hopwood called "Whatever Happened to the British Motorcycle Industry," and Bert Hopwood was an engineer working at Triumph and then BSA and then Norton and maybe AJS as well, I think. And what was interesting when I was reading that was this sense of how in the 50s and the 60s, or even the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, there was this flourishing motorcycle industry where you could leave a job on Monday and start another one on or leave a job on Friday and start
yeah,
another one on Monday, and you could move around the brands within the industry, and that sense of kind of learning that came from all those companies in one place. And obviously, as manufacturing died out in Britain, that disappeared. India has that. India has this wealth of opportunity for designers, young designers, to go from
yeah,
across different brands and different opportunities. And I think that's really exciting. I think that's really good. And as I say, I
yeah.
see so much talent. I mean, we did years ago, 20, 13, 14, I think again. We came over and did a thing with ISD. So there was when ISD DSK in Pune.
DSK. Right.
That's it. We did a couple of weeks doing a design teaching component there, and I was blown away then by the level of enthusiasm and talent, and yeah, there's a lot less cynicism in the Indian market. I think because the opportunity is so big and broad and great at the moment, and India is just growing and growing and growing, and I think that makes it a hugely exciting market, and that's clearly why it's driving the rest of the world now.
Yeah, and to be very honest with you, last 10 years has been crazily exciting for designers in India because like as I said earlier in this podcast, that many people were requesting you to be on this podcast. Before 10 years, let's say when I was doing my engineering or in design college when I was there, I hardly knew any designer from India, and there was very little awareness, and there was a lot of skepticism also. Like when I told my parents that I want to do design after engineering, none of them were happy. In fact, my grandmother scolded me that you have a settled job in Tata, you have done engineering, why are you going? So that was the scenario, and today I see so much of enthusiasm, and people requesting each other, people contact me, asking how to get into design and things like that. And I think social media has done a wonderful job.
Absolutely, I'm really conscious that we graduated just about the right time for that. So I mean, I remember when we were at uni that we couldn't. As I say, I didn't have a computer. Ian had a Mac, and we shared his Mac. I used his Mac, and I think I got a Mac in the last year of uni. But when we did, what we would do is, because you'd still pay for dial-up at this point, so you were still paying whatever it was, 10p a minute telephone rate. So it was really expensive to be online. So what we would do is we would use the university computers to surf, and then we would write down URLs, in a notepad, write down the whole HP, TTT, blah, blah, and then go home, look that up, download the page, so if you were writing an essay or something, so you then had access to the article that you could then use as in your reference to your essay, in order to try and minimize the amount of time you were on dial-up. And I mean, that was sort of 97, 98, 99. And then by the time we graduated in sort of 2000, 2001, by the time we started the business, the internet was already becoming quite prominent. I mean, obviously it was already prominent, it was already there, massively so, but it was, and it was part of the reason we called the business Xenophya. So, people are always, why did you call it that? I mean, and every time I used to go and see Steve Harris at Harris, he used to say to me, "Here, Lester, it's Mark on the phone from Xenophobia Design," and I'm like, "Steve, it's not. There's no B in it. It's not Xenophobia. That's something totally different." So it means strange. So Xeno means strange or foreign, and fire is apparently it's a scientific term. We found it in a dictionary somewhere, and it means strange in shape or form, or different in shape or form. But the reason we went for it was because we thought, well, nobody's going to have that on the internet, and we did. It was a stupid name, and I learned a lot about not having stupid names from that. But it definitely helped in terms, you could misspell it online, and you'd still find our website, and you'd still find us, and we, I think we posted a load of work on, things like Coraflot and Car Design News when they were, and Core 77 when they were big, before Behance even, and certainly before Instagram, which is where obviously it all exists now. And I think that got us a huge amount of global coverage at a time. It was sort of a double-edged sword because there weren't many clients. Motorcycle design was, when you think about it, as a business case. If you sat down and said to somebody, "We're going to set up a design studio," okay, what are you going to design? We're going to design motorcycles. Okay, how many people around the world need those services? Well, not many. Few businesses, maybe 30 businesses tops really need industrial design services designing motorcycles. Okay, how many of those are based in your home country? Oh, none. Okay, how much international coverage have you got? Not a lot, really. The business case made no sense at all. But I think because of the internet, we were able to pick up work in Europe, work in India. If it hadn't have been for the internet, and we were we were very lucky. We were very fortuitous to meet Royal Enfield when we did, and that led to some more work. So we also did work in India for Aisha Tractors. We did some work for Bajaj Commercial. So that global exposure at a young age. And as I say, it wasn't until we worked for Triumph that we worked with an English company. All of the, we were at the age of 20, we were in international business. And that absolutely was only possible because of the internet. And I think we were lucky in that today, I think getting your sketches and your renders seen is really hard because there's so much of it online. Whereas when we did it, I remember I posted, there was a picture I did. There was a guy approached us to do he wanted to do a monocoque, carbon fiber monocoque based on Peter Williams' patent. And we did a sketch for an Evo motorcycle, we called it. So it was a clamshell monocoque. And I did this sketch and this rendering. And the idea was we did it to try and help them get some investment. They were going to use it. And the project never really went anywhere. But I posted those sketches online and they got like, millions of views. And still, if you Google it now, they still pop up. And I think, again, it was just right time, right place. We were just lucky in that sense, I think. But yeah, no, the internet has definitely transformed, and made what was a much more international marketplace. The last 20 years, it's become, and as I say, websites like Bike Exif and Pipeburn and Visor Down and Ride Apart. Yeah, and then also, now things like XBHP and the stuff that you see Shimi doing now with his latest Moto, I can't remember what it's called now, Moto, but his latest podcast. Yeah. But all of that sort of stuff is it's now international. It's now going both ways, and it's and I think that's fascinating that's the case, and I think that's definitely that influences design trends. Because what's cool, in Europe is cool in India, and what's cool in India is cool in Europe, and I think that's interesting. Is that sort of fusion you get of design and product is really interesting.
No, it has become very interesting, and globalization has become a true thing because when I was searching for something related to Hunter speedometer, one video popped out which was done by a British guy.
Yeah.
So the same bike, it is here, it is there.
That's part of Royal Enfield's advantage. I was going to say, I think that's part of Royal Enfield's advantage as well, is that we do have this. We talk about British roots and Indian soul, and I really like that. I think that really captures it because the company is what it is today because of the enthusiasm of the Indian market, because of the soul, and for Indian consumers, Royal Enfield is an Indian motorcycle, no question. It stands for the army. It stands for it's it's Independence Day parades. It's bullet. It's pinstripes. It's it's the it's the sort of the heartlands and Kerala and the Punjab and that's absolutely what Royal Enfield is. But you go to North America or you go to Brazil, for example, and it's seen as a British brand, and I think that kind of duality, it's neither really, it's both. That's being comfortable with that is really good. And I loved when we did the 120th anniversary bikes. That was a lovely opportunity. We took the original, so we found one of the original the certificates of limited business status. So when Royal Enfield first became a limited business in 1901 or whatever it was, and they'd done these beautifully, Victorian sort of style illustrated kind of graphic design on the certificate. And we took that and we made that. Graphics. Yeah, that's it. And we made that the tank badge. And what we actually wanted to do was a Union Jack and the Indian flag together. But you're not allowed to put. You're not allowed to, Indian products are not legally allowed to depict the Indian flag on them. So in the end, we just used the rest of that motif. But we got the badges made. So Siva went down the road in Chennai and found a business that does brass castings, and so the badges were all handmade and handcrafted. And I love that kind of that fusion again of there were elements of influence from the original British company. There were elements of that local Indian craftsmanship, and I love how that comes together. And I think that's something that going, we've got lots of opportunity to do is to sort of keep that all of those stories coming in, but that fusion of sort of that as I say, that British roots and Indian soul. I think it just sums up who we are as a business.
Yeah.
That's that soul and that enthusiasm. When you go to something like Ridermania, which is just I fucking love Ridermania. Ridermania is so cool. It's like the best thing anywhere in the world. It really is. It's so good, and the energy there, the enthusiasm and the energy for the brand there is just insane. It's mind blowing, and I love getting out there and just being in the middle of the crowd and jumping around like a lunatic with everybody else. And it's such a great event, and I don't think there's another brand that I'm aware of that has that attracts that level of energy, that level of enthusiasm. I can't think of another event anywhere else in the industry that has the same excitement as Ridermania. Maybe Sturgis comes a little bit close, but Sturgis is a different demographic now. It's a different age set. Sturgis, which is Harley's big event in North America, their typical age is a lot older now. Whereas, Ridermania is still, our average age is 25, so it's a young and youthful and vibrant thing, and that just makes it so cool. And so I do think that sort of that globalization, but not globalization in a way, but it's still our identity is still very much that coming together of those two stories.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, that does make sense. And I think being in India, we see that impact Royal Enfield, which has created. Everybody knows that, British heritage come into play. And now the awareness is there that people are not just buying, looking at the bike. They, go one step further to study about little bit about brand and history and things like that. I remember when I had gone to Goa, there is this garage cafe by Royal Enfield, and
Yeah.
this the salesman started telling me stories about this flying fleet, and
Yeah.
I was blown away by the the kind of story he was telling, the narration, and how the brand has retained those core values in today's bike and those relation.
Yeah.
I think that culture what Royal Enfield has created, it's quite substantial. I think nobody can miss it for
No,
sure.
absolutely.
So
And it's not fabricated. It's not, it's not
it was quite organic, I guess. As in,
exactly that. It's not something that's sort of been dreamed up by a fancy agency somewhere separate to, this is something that is real. I mean, so the Flying Flea, I was really fortunate. Back in 2018, I got to go and meet 4 or 5 of the veterans. We did a series of films about the history that's still on the Royal Enfield website.
okay,
And I got to go and meet. Sadly, I think all of them have now passed away, even in that short period of time, because they were just at that age, I guess. But they had amazing stories that they were telling us, and again, something I really love about this brand is you get to meet people like that. I got to meet Johnny Britton before he passed away. Who was Royal Enfield's,
oh,
really successful trials rider. So Royal Enfield's motorsport heritage is really in trials. That was in the 50s and the 60s. Royal Enfield dominated international 6-day trials, mostly because of the swinging arm. So obviously, I guess that the Bullet was the first bike with an articulating swinging arm in mass production. So we really, if you think every bike today has an articulating swinging arm at the back of the bike, the Bullet was the first bike to have that. And that's part of the reason why, so the story of the G2 Bullet was that post-war, there was a small team in Royal Enfield that sort of had this little sideline, this little secret project they were working on with the swinging arm. And they built a prototype and they entered it into the Colmore Cup, and it was relatively successful, and so they then entered it into a few more trials events, and it went on and it won with people like Jack Stoker and Johnny Britton's dad, and Johnny Britton himself, and some of those other factory riders. They went on and they won as I say, dominated international 6-day trials. So 6-day trials they were like a bit like rally exercises today, in that you would ride navigation sections. So you would do long distance navigation, and then you would do special observed sections, which is like trials today, where you had to do an obstacle section without putting your feet down. But they were much more about the navigation as well. They were the long distance. So if you Google Scottish 6 days trial, it's still like that now, where you see them going over the moors, and they're when they were real tests of the bike, the endurance of the bike and the machine. And I think that's why the Indian Army saw the potential in the bike. When the Indian Army were looking for a bike that they could use in rough terrain, on the border countries in the north, they wanted a bike that could go anywhere and do everything. And the Bullet was so good at that, and so far ahead of its time when it came out, that that's kind of, I guess, why it's lasted so long. And so getting to meet people like Johnny Britton, and talk to him about, he had stories of riding against Steve McQueen and Bud Ekins and people like that, in the and
Wow.
and he was such a gentleman. He was such a nice guy, Johnny Britton. He was lovely. And people like Gordon May. I mean, Gordon, I don't know if you've ever met Gordon. He's our sort of official company historian. And Gordon knows so much about the brand and the heritage of it, and there are so many stories around it that, and I love finding that out, that, because it's not manufactured, it's not made up, we've not just gone and bought a brand and said, right, we're going to now reimagine this brand. It's that story is 100% genuine, and you can trace it all the way back. So we had a bunch of the original 50s test riders came and visit us, just prior to COVID, actually. Came to the UK Tech Centre, and we did we had all of the staff there, and they told us stories from the 50s. And there was one of the test riders told us a story about how they would be sent out on mileage, and they'd go somewhere to mileage, and how he took a goldfish like 500 miles. I think he took a goldfish from London to Edinburgh in stuffed down his jacket in a little plastic bag, because his friend wanted to deliver a goldfish. And just random stories like that I think, again, you couldn't make them up. That
Wow.
It's so authentic. So yeah, no, I absolutely love the brand. And I can't imagine working for another brand, honestly. I am fully invested in Royal Enfield, 100%.
Wow, that passion. I think when people will listen to your story and everything, I think you don't have to say it again that you're passionate about, or you're invested into this brand or anything, because whenever you're talking about Royal Enfield, it's so visible that anybody will understand how much you are invested in that. Wow, Mark, I think this conversation, I just don't want to end this conversation, because it happens like that. I think when you meet some like-minded people, and when you have so many stories, I think it's just, you feel like you just keep listening to this. And I think this is becoming that kind of a conversation.
I have got one question for you. I'd be interested to hear from you. What do you think Royal Enfield should do next? What do you think we could do next? What do you think we
do next?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was not prepared for this question, but but I think what I feel is Royal Enfield, I think it has got the pulse of that customer who wanted that nostalgia, some sort of a status, and as you said, that story, accessibility, and desirability. I think you have got the right pulse there, and I think future, as you already mentioned, I think EV will be an interesting scenario. And when you are talking about EV, the only brand I could think of was Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson was also known only for that high revving thumpy engines and all that. Very similar to what Royal Enfield is, but in a different way, right? And when they launched their EV lineup, the live wires basically, so I think that was a very beautiful approach. I would say I really love the original live wire, and whatever they are doing, I think that would be something similar to that, but with that, Royal Enfield Genesis will be something very exciting to see. And I think if you ask me, I think that is what I'll be looking forward to the most when it comes to Royal Enfield and the future of it. And you know, I work in Bajaj. I have worked with Honda before, but there has been something with this Royal Enfield brand because I have gone to Leh Ladakh twice, and both the times we had rented Royal Enfields. So once I had Himalayan, and the other time I had Classic 500. No, not 500. I think Bullet. So, so both the times, the kind of sense of community I felt was beyond my imagination. For example, wherever I went, taking those bikes, I saw people stopping by, people who were having Royal Enfields. They used to stop
Yeah,
by. They used to, even if they are not stopping, they will, wish me something
yeah,
like this, or they will say, write this, that, something like that, and you immediately get that feeling of, belonging, that you belong to a certain culture or a community or something like that. And I think whatever happens, I think Royal Enfield should not lose that sense of community or
hundred
that
percent,
nostalgia, whatever it is. So I
hundred
think
percent.
when when I see any sort of a Royal Enfield, now I also own a Royal Enfield. So I think that sense of belonging to a community or a culture, I think that is something I always look forward to. I don't know if I have answered your question or not, but
Yeah,
I
no,
think
100%. And exactly that experience of riding in the Himalayas. That we did that this summer just gone, um, and I mean, it's so beautiful you could almost cry. It's just stunning scenery.
I'm
Um,
getting goosebumps just thinking
yeah, oh,
about it.
it's. I mean, and imagine that on an EV maybe. If you could, when you stop, it would just be quiet, and there would just the surroundings and yeah. I mean, it's
No
but
noise.
absolutely that it's that those shared stories, it's that shared experiences, that group of people doing stuff. I every time I ride anywhere in India, I have that, and India is such a beautiful country. I mean, it's funny that the you go to the cities and you get one impression of India, and I love the vibrance and the noise and it's all so intense and close. And it's if you come from where we live in England, which is very rural and quiet, and you go to Chennai, it's just like blah, and but you get out you get out of the cities and you get out to the country. And I've been fortunate enough to ride around India quite a bit, and there are some beautiful spots, and it's such a diverse country. The landscapes change so much. Even just riding east to west from Chennai across to under Bangalore and along into Kerala. The way that it changes from the flat plains, and then you start moving up into the mountains, and then you get into the Ghats, and it's just, I mean, and the Western Ghats are the best roads anywhere in the world. I mean, people talk about going to Italy and riding the Stelvio Pass. Um, but to be honest, Collie Hills is way better, and there's nobody there. It's amazing. India is definitely, from that sense, I think globally, it's as a place, as a destination to ride. People think about Leh and Ladakh, which is stunning and beautiful, and
Hmm.
the road from Manali up is. But also, as I say, Kerala and then Rajasthan and the deserts, and then
Yeah.
there's so many beautiful bits of India to ride in, and I've not really done the northeast yet. I really want to get up into Assam
Oh
and
yeah.
around that area. That looks
That's
amazing. I've not done there before, but are you going to be at Ridermania this year?
this year. Let's see. I wished.
You should be.
I said,
You should be.
yeah, yeah.
Let's
Let's
make
see.
that happen. Okay,
Yeah,
we
and make that.
definitely
When is that, by the way?
November time. I don't. It's normally around about just after Eichmer. It's normally like November the
Winters, no? Yeah.
20th or something like that. Yeah, yeah. But no, I mean, right? If you've
Okay.
not done it before,
Now that you have said, I will make sure that I'll be there.
you definitely need to. Definitely need to.
Actually, it's not very far from Pune, where I live. It's
No, it's not at all. And
yeah.
there's some amazing.
So
So we did that in 2018. We flew into Mumbai and then rode down from Mumbai. So we did. Is it? I'm almost gonna murder the pronunciation, but Konoya or Koyana National Park.
oh,
There's a
Konkan. Oh, Koina National Park.
Koyana National Park. We rode through Koyana National Park, through the
Yeah.
tiger reserves, and just stunning through there. It was beautiful. There's was it Ozard or something like that waterfall that we went to at the bottom of there. It was shut when we got there, so we climbed over the fence and went up, and yeah, it was an amazing
Wow.
trip. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, you definitely should do
Now,
that.
now that we have publicly mentioned it, I think I need to do this.
100%,
I
100%.
will, I will not have any choice now. Awesome. So, Mark, I think with this, we come to the final part of the podcast. I have some quick questions, okay? Just to,
Okay.
I think already this conversation has been a very light and very, conversational. It is, I'm truly enjoying this, by the way. It's very rare that you meet someone, you talk to someone for the first time, and then you just keep talking. Many a times it happens that you get a hard time to find topics to talk to. But with you, it's like we have so many topics, and now the time is limited. So I am truly loving this conversation. So I have very quick questions. Okay,
Okay.
maybe a cliche sort of rapid fire questions or something. I don't know. But you have already described Royal Enfield, so many things about it. But which is your favorite Royal Enfield? I think you have answered this before. Interceptor?
No, GT of our current
Continental
bikes.
GT.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although
Okay.
I would always say, and actually, doesn't even have to be a Royal Enfield. The best bike is the one you're riding right there. Yeah, it doesn't actually
Which
matter
one?
what bike you're riding. The one you're riding at that
Ah,
moment in time. So it doesn't actually matter what motorcycle you're riding, as long as you're with a good bunch of friends and you're on good roads. Actually, honestly speaking, you can have fun on a scooter or on anything at all. But yeah, of our current bikes, Continental GT is my favourite.
wow. When you said that, I think it makes complete sense because the main fun is that riding. Being on the road, being in that moment, and if you have a good company around you, I think there's nothing
That's
like
it,
it.
100%.
Yeah, awesome. So, among all the cool projects you have done with RE, which is that one project you are like most proud of?
Hmm. Um, I don't know. I'm super proud of them all. I mean, there's a lot that we've got coming up that I'd love to be able to talk about. That because we've been working on projects for 4 or 5 years in some cases, and they're all beginning to come to fruition now. So we've got a lot of stuff in the next 18 months that's coming out that's going to be super exciting, and some of those definitely tick those boxes. Um, I think proud of. Again, interestingly, it wasn't a design project, but the Pegasus project that we did, which was really only just a color trim and graphic. Um, that was the project because my grandfather served with the British Armed Forces during World War Two. The opportunity to meet those veterans and talk to them about their experiences and capture that, and the fact that they then, as I say, old age caught them up. I think that's something that I'm pleased we managed to do that. We managed to capture that and document that. That for me, that was a personal project, and I'm really grateful that I was able to do that project because it wasn't really my remit. It wasn't really my job, my function, but I was lucky that I was able to do it, and I'm grateful that I was. And so I think that certainly from a pride point of view, that certainly had a personal connection to it.
Okay, awesome. And which was the most challenging one?
Oh, they're all challenging. I mean, um, every project has its challenges, um, and especially when you're trying to do products, when you're trying to do products to fulfill those criteria that I talked about. Making a bike that's super desirable. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's certainly doable. But to do that and make it accessible, that's always a challenge. That trade off between cost and price and position, and we want the most amount of ground clearance we can get for off road riding, but we want the lowest seat height to make it as accessible as possible. Those two things are diametrically opposed in what they're trying to do. And I guess in some ways it's not the difficulty isn't for me; it's for all the chaps that have to deliver it. It's all the engineers and the designers that have to deliver it. I have a relatively easy part of that to say, no, we need both of those. It needs to be both. We need perfect, we need loads of ground clearance and we need really good feet ground access. Now you go away and work that problem out. And so for me, I think the most challenging thing is making sure that we don't lose sight of the original goals of a project throughout the process. So from when you talk to the voice of the customer, you talk to customers, you understand what they want, and then making sure that thread, that the things that when you start the project you hold are really important. When you're in the thick of it and you're trying to get a project through and finished, and there are questions, and I think that's trying to hold on to that and make sure that stays all the way through to production. I think that's clearly that's the most important part of that's the most challenging part. I think is making sure that it stays true to the concept all the way through.
Awesome. So, do you have any designer who have like been your role model for your life, or you look up to, or someone like that?
So, I mean, as I say, growing up as a kid, people like Glinka and Junkyo, Massimo Tambrini, and Robiano, and people like that were sort of. But I'm actually not particularly. And obviously Gerald Kisker, as I say, in terms of business, that you can do that. You can start with a small business and grow it into a large business. Not that we ever actually managed that. We never managed anywhere near the scale that he's achieved. I mean, his achievements are hugely impressive. But I'll be honest, I've never been one for studying particular designers. And I mean, I've got colleagues and friends that I went to uni with that know every car designer that ever was, and I'm not so strong with that, I mean, and I'm impressed by people that do new things. It always blows my mind when you look at people like Alekis Agonis and Malcolm Sayer and people like that did things before you had CAD, and they looked at something differently. We went to Duxford recently, which is the RAF museum, and I was going around there with Ed Cobb, who's head of the concept engineering team. Really talented engineer, and an amazing drift car driver as well. He's definitely a bit loose on a motorcycle too. He's properly fast. But we were walking around Duxford and just saying, it's amazing that when you look at a Mark 1 Spitfire to the Mark 20 Spitfire, and that was a 5-year time frame effectively, and they did all of that with slide rules and drawing tables. There was no CAD, there was no, none of the things, none of the tools that we have today, and that fascinates me, that amazes me. I find that really inspiring. But as I say, I couldn't list off hundreds of designers and say that they were hugely influenced. No, I mean, certainly the 916 and Massimo Tambrini, clearly, like everybody, it's an obvious answer, but they were clearly influential people growing up, certainly.
Awesome. Now that you already mentioned that you love riding in India and all that, except that, which is your favorite thing about India?
My favorite thing about India, it's the people. I love how friendly and welcoming the people are in India. I like India is very different to Great Britain in the way that people are much more open. In some ways, they're not. In some ways, that there's parts of Indian culture and society that's actually quite closed and repressed. But there's other ways where it's much more open and friendly. And but I think it is the people. I to be honest with you, I find national barriers irrelevant almost. It's what I love is if it's almost like that it's that collective of people that are in the same shared thing. So it doesn't matter where you go. I've just come back I've been in Brazil and in the US and had a great time there with loads of people that love bikes. And I think that for me is but yeah, I really like, as I say, it's a beautiful country. I love riding around and exploring and roaming around in India. India's got lots more space outside of the cities. The cities, there's no space. There's no outdoor space. There's no space. When you get outside of that, I love the way you can roam around in India and but yeah, the enthusiasm, the energy, the people. I think is what I like most. Not
Okay.
not a massive fan of the superheat. I've got to be honest. I mean, like, I like
Oh,
so
actually, Chennai, I think, is like the what do you say, top of that.
it's yeah, it's. I mean,
Because
so
Pune and Bangalore, I think they're relatively
they're
better.
not so bad.
Better.
I think
Yeah, they're not so bad.
I'm really fortunate in that. So England is miserable during the winter. It's wet and drizzly and cold, and we only get
Mm.
3 hours of daylight a day, and it's rubbish. And so I get to travel to India, and during the winter, I feel a bit guilty because I disappear off to the sunshine and leave the family in the rain and the drizzle. Um,
Oh,
but then when it's like it is now, it's 40 plus in India at the moment. It's really hot right now in Chennai.
yeah.
Here today it's 21 degrees and it's lovely, so I get the best of both worlds. I get to sort of I get to migrate like a bird. It's good. But yeah, there are times when
That's
the
good.
heat becomes overwhelming. It is too hot.
Okay. And what about Indian food? Do you enjoy Indian food,
I
or
really
is it
like
too
Indian
spicy?
food. No, 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 no. I really enjoy Indian food. I mean, I've never got a clue what I'm eating. I mean, I pretty much go on the red dot green dot system as to whether I'm eating something that was is vegetarian or not. But other than that, I very rarely know what it is I'm eating. I love ice cream and gulab jams. I think is fantastic.
Oh,
That's one of
gulab
my favorite things.
jamuns.
I love ice cream and gulab jam. I've got a sweet tooth and I love gulab jam and jalebi as well. We I remember we went to Varanasi on a ride one time.
Mm.
And we got up at like 4 a.m. in the morning because we had some work to do in the afternoon. So I said, well, I'm terrible for going somewhere, getting Google Maps out and going, that looks great, let's go there. And then basically just coercing or bullying people into coming on a ride with me. And so there was a guy there that I was with called Ankor, and I was like, right, come on, let's go. So we got up at 4 a.m. in the morning in the fog. It was really thick fog. And then it got to about 6 a.m. And I thought I've overdone this here. I've encouraged him to come on this ride, and it's miserable. It's cold and foggy, and then it got to 6 a.m. and the sun came up over the horizon, and the fog burnt off, and we stopped and we had chai and jalebi, and that was just the best meal. It was so nice to stop and warm
Wow,
up with a little bit. It was really good. But yeah, no, I really like Indian food.
awesome. Finally, coming to the last question, that now that you have touched upon so many things, and there are so many aspiring design students who are watching this podcast, uh, what is that one advice for them? Like, if somebody wants to like aspire to become a motorcycle designer, what is just one advice for them?
I think um, I think it's a combination of stuff. I don't. There is one thing. I think you got to graft. You've got to work at it. You've got to work hard. You've got to practice. You've got to you know keep working at what you're doing. Um, Work on your non-design skills as well as your design skills. So your design skills are the cash in your pocket to play the game of poker, but they only get you a seat at the table. You've still got to be able to play the game as well. So
Mhm.
you've got to network, you've got to meet people. It's not about what you know a lot of the time, but who you know is a massively important part of the game. Also, I think don't wait for somebody to tell you. One of the things I do notice a lot is um, people kind of waiting for somebody to tell them what they need to learn. And one of the things I think owning our own business did for Ian and I was we didn't know and we made mistakes. We made lots of mistakes. I mean, as I say, I remember when we made the first pattern for a composite part and we couldn't pull the pattern out of the tool because we didn't realize it wasn't in draft. You learn very quickly like that, and it's so for me that the experimentation and being entrepreneurial, trying stuff and just having a go. Um, and like anything, with enough hours, enough practice, you get good. I think that's the other thing is if I could show you my portfolio from university, it was rubbish. I look back at that now. I found an old portfolio the other day, and wasn't great. And we learned a huge amount, um, and evolved and grew as designers whilst we were doing it. And I would say that's the other thing is that you don't have to be great today. It's don't assume that because you've not made it at 20, you're or 25, you've not got the talent. I think one of the things for me is keep trying it, keep working at it, because that's certainly, and do it because you love it. So it shouldn't be about the ego of it. It shouldn't be about don't do it because you want everybody to say this is great, but do it because you love the thing that you're doing. Do it because it's um, the only person I really care what they think about the work that I do. I mean, obviously, I want to get paid and I want to keep a job, but the person that really matters is my dad. As long as my dad likes what I'm doing, I'm doing all right as far as I'm concerned. That's the person I want to impress. And my granddad, not that he's around anymore, but that in my mind, it's that, and my peers, my small group of friends that I grew up with, that they're the people that matter. Don't worry too much about what the wider world thinks. It's do it because you're passionate about it and you love it. That for me is and enjoy it. It's it can be really stressful, but you do it because you love it, and that's the important thing. It's I think it's important to keep that in mind all the time. Is that's the reason for doing it, and cherish it when you're doing it. I mean, one of the things that I miss is that I don't get to pick up a pen or clay model very often, a clay modeling tool very often these days, because most of my job today is about instructing other people what to do and about arguing about, we need this for this. And so when you're doing it, live in that moment, enjoy that moment. I think that's important.
Wow, Mark, that's a very powerful message. I just want to highlight a couple of things. What you said about developing your non-design skills. I think I realized this thing very late in my career. I was that person who was focusing only on my creative skills and never thought things like communication, or networking, or uh, things like just putting your work on social media. You know, uh, so all these kind of things I realized it very late in my career. But if somebody is an aspiring student, and if he is listening to this conversation, I think this is probably equally important as your design skills. I think they go hand in hand, and I think they are very
100%.
important.
Well,
And
and also
yeah,
your so sketching is super important. Sketching is how we communicate. It's how we talk. If you like, you talk through drawings, and
right.
it's so difficult to describe. If I said describe that surface, you can't put it into words, but you can draw it, and that's why it's so important. But we equally over fetishize sketching a little bit. It becomes a thing where sketching should be a means to an end, not an artwork in its own right in some ways. And I think it's just as important to be able to be hands-on. So whether you build a model in CAD and you can look at how it works and now it's going to go together, or whether you physically get into it and make a physical model or a maquette or but try and learn that side of it, because if all you can do is create a pretty picture, that's never going to make it into the world. That's never going to be born as an idea. You need a designer's skills are about negotiating with the engineers, negotiating with the sourcing team, with making sure that the price point is right, and
Right.
that all those trade-offs, those hundreds of myriads of trade-offs, seat shape versus comfort versus interaction you need, the fuel tank versus the fuel tank volume versus whether you can press it and you can get the crease on the tank the way you want it. And if you understand all of that, then your aesthetic vision can be realized. If you don't, it's going to get watered down and it's going to get lost. And so,
Mhm.
it's become an engineer and try and understand as best you can, the engineering side of it. Become a businessman and try and understand the economics of it. Become a psychologist and try and understand the thought processes of the consumer and how they approach it. Those are the things that are going to mean that your design idea has half a chance of being born. If you can't do those things, then the rest of it, you're not going to be able to fight for your design and make sure that design integrity isn't lost as it moves through the process.
Yeah, completely. I think now that I am being in the industry, I completely realize the importance of those things. And along with this, the other thing which you highlighted was the difference between liking and being passionate about. I think if somebody likes motorcycles or cars, I think that doesn't necessarily mean that you can become a good designer. I think design, you have to be absolutely passionate and driven to gain that knowledge, go out of your comfort zone, get your hands dirty, and things like that. And if you are that person, then I think you could be a very good designer. If you are
I
just
think
liking the form and aesthetics of it, then I think probably this is
100%.
not for you.
I think the thing you got to remember is it's such a niche industry. I mean, especially bikes. Even just
Yeah.
transport design in general. I remember we used to have this conversation with students where I think globally there are fewer transportation designers than there are professional footballers that play in the World Cup. Now, if you said to a kid growing up,
Uh,
I want to play in the World Cup, you'd say, "Wow, that's a dream. That's a thing." Um,
yeah.
and yet, I don't think people realise, and if you're on top of your game as an industrial designer, you are one of a handful of people globally. A few thousand people, maybe. I don't know how many the number is now, but probably only within the below 10,000, say globally. That may be
Yeah.
wrong. I don't know, and by that I mean actual designer. People that have designer on their job title, and there's a much broader range of people that are involved in the design process. Clearly,
Mm.
um, but so if you want to get into that space, you're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to demonstrate to the people that are hiring in those roles. If you come to me with a portfolio and you want a job at Royal Enfield, you have to demonstrate to me you get it. I've got to know you get it, and I've got to know that you're gonna understand it, and you're gonna create concepts that our consumers are gonna love. And that isn't gonna come, if you've never swung your leg over a bike and you've never been part of that world. How are you possibly going to understand that? So yeah, you need to be fully immersed. You've got to be. It's
Yeah.
not to say that you can't take influences from people with different skills and backgrounds, and there is a danger within the automotive industry that every designer is a petrolhead and comes from that background. But I think there needs to be something that pulls you together and shows you get it. And I think that is just being invested. It's just putting in the time, and putting in the hours, and having the love for it.
And the last thing which you mentioned was cherishing small moments. As in many a times I come across so many designers who get very quickly demotivated because one thing or one sketch didn't work out, and I feel that it's very important to say it out loud that the fun part is the process and the result is just the outcome of it. And I think being a designer, it's very important to enjoy the process and cherish those, small moments or that sense of contribution. Like in whatever way, sketching is just one part of this big ecosystem, and we all are working towards one particular goal. And if you are getting a chance to contribute in any way, then maybe that's the reason to cherish.
Well, and
I
and
think, yeah,
there is no one person, and I sort of blame the industry in its own right here. We sometimes we hold up designers. There are superstar design names, people like Chris Bangle or
yeah,
someone like that everybody's heard of. Um, and no one person designs anything. There's no one design, even at a small studio like Royal Enfield. We don't have anywhere near the division of labour, as I say, that a car studio have. But even there, it's a team of people that are, and honestly speaking, the chief engineer on a project is as responsible for the design coming out how you want it as you are, or the lead clay modeler. That those those guys are influencing the product just as much. So no one person is the designer for it, and I think there's a danger that it's a marketable package. You put a person up there and you say this person is head of design or whatever, so they're responsible or accountable for. I definitely, as I say, I do no design now. Every now and then I'll come along and say, I don't like the way we've done that. Can we do that differently? Or or I have an argument about whether. But ultimately, it's all my team. It's all of their work and their their ability and their talent, and I can't really take credit for anything that we do. It's the team that do it, and so don't. It's all too easy to get kind of tied up in the ego of saying I did this, I need my name against it, I want to be credited for it or accountable for it. And I try really hard to make sure that all of the team do get credited for the work they do. That it's not because I don't design anything. I try and make sure the people that do the design work get seen for it. But honestly, at the same time, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about and maybe that's easy for me to say because of the role I'm in now and the position I'm in now. I don't need to worry about it anymore. But yeah, I don't think for me it's enjoy what you're doing and the team that you're doing it with. Don't worry too much about the I did this or I did that. That's far less. And I think Instagram's and that culture hasn't helped that, because now it's all about look at what I've done, look at my pictures, look at the stuff I've done.
The entire army behind that one single product, and that credit should be given to every one of them. Designers just get a little bit more fame and glamour, I guess, but that is not entirely true. And that's why I think cherishing every sort of contribution is very important, which will, I think, keep you going in this
100%.
difficult roller coaster of a journey, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow. With that powerful message, Mark, let's conclude this conversation. To be very honest, I don't want to end this. To be very honest, I think it's already 2.5 hours already, and I've already started feeling guilty about taking so much of your time. But honestly, this has been like a very, very enjoyable gem of a conversation, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. So I can't express my gratitude to you for spending so much of time and wisdom with us.
That's been my pleasure, and I hope to see you at Ride. We'll have a beer together and we'll talk some more.
Yeah. That time
we'll
I will tell you. Yeah, that time I will tell you so many more stories about Leh Ladakh and my rides in India. I think I'm certainly looking forward to it.
Good. Okay, Saket, thank you very much.
Okay,
thank you for asking
thank you
me along.
so much.
Thank you. Take care.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.